All right. Welcome to a brand new talk show, Spirited Conversations. This is Mike Wilson, and we're going to do this about once a week, maybe three times for toward the end of this year. And then if it goes well, we're going to start maybe a weekly program next year. Talon is a young man who has decided to preach the gospel. And in these spirited conversations, I'm going to have some private conversations with some really interesting people. I think a young man who wants to devote his life to preaching the gospel is automatically interesting, raises all kinds of questions. Why would any talented young man want to do that? But be that as it may, the rest of you can be kind of a fly on the wall or a spy behind the wall, listening in and snooping into this conversation. I suppose if the Apostle Paul could write some very personal things to people, and other people could snoop in on that mail, then it's okay to listen in to an interesting conversation. I have all kinds of these with very interesting people, and hence want to open this up and uh, give other people a chance to listen to some fascinating things that I've had had the privilege of being in a front row seat concerning. And so today, Talon lives in Colorado. I'm gonna dive in and begin asking questions, firing away, Talon, and you just uh, feel free to take it any direction you want to take it. But first of all, tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, leading up to this point in your life.
So, first of all, thanks for having me, Mike. Um, I was I was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, actually, and my family all lives in Oklahoma and Texas. And just by job, Dad ended up in Albuquerque, and me and my sisters, we were all raised there. I was the only one that was born there, and since I was probably in high school, all I wanted to do was leave Albuquerque, leave New Mexico, looking for somewhere new. And I always knew I kind of wanted
Albuquerque's
to.
a nice town, though, isn't it? I mean, there's a
It's
lot to do there.
there's some good food there. They have great green chili there.
Mexican food.
Yeah, it's okay there. New Mexican food is what people go for, especially the green chili. But I always knew I kind of wanted to end up in Colorado, and just by way of coming up here, I started worshiping here at my home congregation at Pratt Parkway, and in that time, I always knew I wanted to preach. It wasn't just until I got here that I actually put that into action, and started taking steps towards that. But I couldn't even remember being in high school thinking there's two careers that I want to pursue, and one is architecture, and the other one is ministry. And I was always wondering, like, how do I put these together? And there was no way that I could. And so went to college for architecture, also went to college for ministry, and kind of in that war of which of these do I really want to dedicate my life to. I always had that stronger pull towards ministry and towards preaching, and just talking to people about God and the Bible was always so important to me, even though I really had this desire for design. But
Is your college work geared toward ministry or something that would dovetail with this?
so I have both. Again, I have an associate's of architecture, and even when in those 2 years of getting my associates of architecture, I was like, I know this isn't exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, I want to go into ministry. And so 2 years of that, and then 2 years in the electrical trade, and finally went back and got my bachelor's in biblical studies, and Christian studies with an emphasis of biblical studies. And I remember, like, it was probably like within the first week of actually being at Grand Canyon University, where I was getting that Christian studies degree, that I was actually like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. This is the place to be. Like, why did I put this off
Biblical
for so
studies
long?
versus architecture, huh?
Yeah, and it was when I was in school for architecture, I was like, oh, this is fun, and I really like this, and I'm good at this. But when I was in school for biblical studies, it's like, oh, this is where I belong. Like,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
greatly outweighs staring at a computer for 16 hours a day building a house. But I've always had a passion for wanting going into ministry. I just delayed so long in actually pursuing it and taking the steps to get there.
Well, was the electrician thing just kind of a detour?
It was. It was a detour. Um, so in that transition of coming from, so I graduated with my associates in New Mexico, and it was right after that that I moved up to Colorado, and it just happened that there was an availability in the electrical trade, and so it was kind of one of those. Well, I'll do this for now until I figure out my next steps. And so for 2.5 years, I was an electrician before I decided to give that up and actually go back to school. And in that process, I was working with Josh Higgins, the preacher here, and he was kind of my mentor and introducing me to the idea and the life of a preacher. And we would study together. And then I started taking online classes at Grand Canyon University for preaching. And so it was kind of like a slow process, but in that cycle, in that system of an electrician that was supporting me, I never really had the ambition to make that a career. It was intermittent, I guess.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I know of a church that has a building that has a bunch of old electrical wires. And so, that might come in handy as a side.
You know, I've never been to a church that didn't say something like that. Every church I've been to it's like, oh man, you know, this church was built in the 60s, and will you take a look at our furnace real quick? Our auditorium's cold, or we got this light over here that flickers during the sermon. It's really distracting. Can you take a look at that?
Well,
I'm happy to do it, by the way. I'm happy to do it.
You know, I went through that thought process when I was your age, maybe a little younger, and it was accounting or computer programming. I was on the cutting edge of that at the time. Probably could have done a whole lot more materially if I'd gone that route, but I have no regrets. However, I'm going to ask you, what do you think you can accomplish as a full-time preacher that you couldn't accomplish maybe as a full-time electrician doing a little preaching on the side?
You know, I consider that a lot, actually, especially when I started pursuing taking the steps that to really start becoming a preacher. I kind of had to weigh that because everywhere we go, everywhere a member of the church goes, they have to understand that they're somewhat of a missionary in the work field, in school, everywhere they go. And that was something I considered for myself: is, am I going to do better preaching than I am staying in this trade and introducing people to who God is? Because I found out that a lot of people either wanted to know God and didn't realize it and was seeking something, or wanted to reconnect their life to God and just didn't know what direction to go. And that's probably about, those two put together is probably about like 30% of the people that I worked with. And the rest did not want to know God and really wanted to push your faith and push your buttons in it. And the conclusion I came to is I think it is more effective for me anyway to be a preacher and still outreach and still reach those 30%. My statistic is 30% of people that want to know God and are seeking, because those people are everywhere. And it also kind of reminds me, when I was in college in Arizona, I worked at Target for those 2 years that I was there. And I found out that more people in retail than in the trades were people that were seeking and wanting to reconnect their faith, or had an interest, or didn't know they had an interest. And as soon as I was like, I'm a student trying to go into ministry, all of a sudden it was like the doors open for their mind. They're like, well, let me tell you about my background and how I feel about this and how I feel about that. And I found people that worked at retail were more open to discussion and topic than the people were that I worked with anyway in the trades. Because so many were just like, let me see how far I can push your button with this, and maybe I can get you to get your faith to crack. So I guess all of that to say, in summary, I feel like having experienced having put in time of trying to do some sort of good work and some sort of ministry in the trade, it seems more productive to go into vocational ministry. With that being said, I still feel like every Christian, every member of this family, everywhere they go, is still somewhat of a missionary in there wherever they work, which is kind of weird now that everybody's working from home. It's not so interpersonal, but even without that face to face, like our attitude, our demeanor as Christians, it's just the start to introduce people to the best thing in our life, who we are, and show them like we have something better, a part of our life outside of this job.
Yeah, I think that's right. Every Christian does ministry work if he is what he ought to be as a Christian. And the preacher is no more important than anybody else in the kingdom. We're all important to God, and we have important positions to fill and roles to play. Um, Being a preacher is an extension of your Christianity, just like being an electrician would be an extension of your Christianity. You do the best you can with what God has given you, and doing it full time to me has enabled me to be able to put some building blocks there that going back to the architectural analogy that I never would have been able to do if I hadn't buried myself into this and given it a full time. So I think your thought process is very similar to mine way back when. Um, you're going to get the question if you haven't gotten it already. What do you do for a living? And then you tell people, and they give you this really weird look. Why would, and it says, it's written all over their face. Why in the world would anyone waste his life away doing that? And so, what, what would you tell someone who gives you that look?
I mean, argumentatively, I want to say the question reciprocates. Why would somebody want to waste their life being an electrician forever? Like, that sounds miserable. It sounds like such a waste. But there's uh, it definitely shows that, I mean, preachers are they're a different breed of wanting to do something like this. And it's just a call to passion. It's a call by itself. It's meant to be um it's meant to be something that seems unique and scary and weird. If we look at the prophets in the Old Testament, uh, it seems almost more like you would not want to be a prophet. You had to deliver the hard message. As preachers, we have a responsibility. It's meant to be a hard path, and so it's understandable that people would think, well, I can think of 1,000 other things that I would rather do than something like that. I'd rather be an accountant. I'd rather be anything else. And so my response is I don't know, it's a difficult one because it comes from a call, it comes from an internal desire, an internal passion. And so when people ask me that and their desire is, well, I want to move up in the target corporation, I want to move up in the electrical trade, I want to move up in the architecture field. I see that there's ambition in them for that, but the joy outweighs the ambition to pursue something corporate like that for me anyway. And people are meant to look at us differently because we're meant to be seen differently.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways you can answer that question, and I think I would give a different answer if I were answering it for me and telling someone else, here's a peek into my own thinking, my own mind. But I think that I would also try to connect the dots for them.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize what a person who gives himself to this kind of a life can do for them. They have no clue.
Mm-hmm.
And then that automatically arouses curiosity on their part and gives me an opening, an opportunity to try to begin connecting those dots. Here's what it's done for me. Here's what it can do for you, and I'm your servant.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, but it's multi-layered for sure. Yeah, definitely. Not everybody's cut out for this. That's an absolute truth. So you've begun thinking about it. You've no doubt observed, studied, done some college training in biblical studies, and any other preparation steps?
Um, Besides academics, it was more that I realized I need people that have been doing this for a while to teach more. Mentorship is really what I wanted. And that was something that I was trying to arrange before and after I went off to college for this. Is like I said earlier, Josh and I were kind of studying and he was kind of showing me the way around this. And before I left, I was like, I want to come back to this. I want to learn under you at this church. This seems like the place where I'm going to learn some leadership. And it was within my last semester of college. I called Josh, was like, I still want to do this. Will you entertain an internship? Because I need to learn what it's like to actually work internally in a church. I need to know what it's like to lead, what it's like to put a sermon series together, what it's like to develop a class series together. And so besides like academic coursework, it was like I need people that have done the real thing to tell me what it's actually like on the inside. I need some internship, how to talk to people, how to organize, and what it's like to do this for real, I guess. Because I mean, you could know all of the Bible and read all of the surveys of the church, but hearing it firsthand from people that know what it's like to actually put in the work and do the thing was something that I knew that I really needed.
Yeah, preaching is so unique, and there's not just one way to do it. And in fact, there are a lot of really good men attempting it, some with varying degrees of success, more so than others. And if I had to go back and do it all over again, I think in my early years, I would surround myself with 4 or 5 really good, respected men that I could trust as confidants and to mentor me, and constantly bombard them with questions, because the nuts and bolts of actually how to translate the biblical admonitions into practical everyday work weeks,
Mhm.
it's tricky. And there's definitely a skill set or a multiple skill sets, and there are all kinds of different kinds of preachers who specialize in different areas. Most of us are general practitioners, but we do have special expertise in different areas. And so I would pick this person's brain or pick that person's brain, and what can he teach me to make me better? Without trying to be a copycat. And I certainly don't, when I train a young man, I certainly don't want them to become a clone of me. I want them to be their own man. But nonetheless, after all these years, I think I have something to give to a younger man. And I think that a wise younger man is going to take advantage of that, not only with someone like myself, but someone who has skill sets very different than the ones that I have.
Mhm.
You can learn a lot about how to actually implement what it is you're trying to do.
Just the
I
other
know that
week.
we don't get to pick how our lives unfold. There are going to be a lot of unexpected twists and turns along the way, that things that you're not prepared for. But if you had to kind of map out the big picture of your life and what you want to accomplish doing this work, if you were to project yourself a few decades into the future, and now all of a sudden you're my age, that's a scary thought. And looking backward, what do you want to have accomplished?
So I keep setting out like a 10 and 15-year plan, and it keeps just moving forward. Every 5 years, I keep saying 10 years, it just keeps moving forward. Um, what what I want to have accomplished is probably for the next 10 years, 12 years or so, vocational ministry. I want to be in the church. I want to develop leadership, and I want to just like we're doing. I want to build leaders from a young age, yeah, younger age even, to plan for the future of the church for them and build up leadership put into churches. Um, after like probably 12 years of doing that in the United States, I want to do that internationally. I want to help churches abroad and do the exact same thing. Develop leadership, preach, get the message out there, and let them establish elders in their church and raise up leaders and just keep doing that for a long
So you're
time.
thinking of going to foreign countries.
Yeah, so I
Where
did
would you like to go?
so far, it's probably Ecuador because it's been the only place I've been to abroad besides Mexico. I did 2 mission trips to Ecuador a few years ago,
Do
and
you speak Spanish?
very little, muy poquito. Pero yo quiero practicar. Yo
Okay.
necesito practicar. I really need to practice, and I would love to find somebody to practice with. Um, but the 2 mission trips I went on to Ecuador, it was more for construction as an introduction to get the message out to people that were in the jungle of Ecuador along the Cayapis River, and and that was kind of the mission of the church that was already there. They started with building a building, having a medical clinic, and the gospel just spread out from there. And suddenly they're trying to send boats up and down the river so they can get people into their church. And they're trying to build a church up the river at the next village and up the river from there at the next village from doing that. And the person that I understand that kind of had this vision, Kent Markham, started that and just said, there's a need for the gospel here. How do we introduce it? And from there, establish the elders. They run the churches. He doesn't need to be there because the people that live on that river know what it is to worship, and they continue that mission forward. And that's exactly what I want to keep doing. And we have a brother down there, and I went to his house in Santo Domingo, which is about 3 hours south from the main city, Quito. And he had done mission work in Kumani on the river and then would go back home and is trying to do the same thing in his own church. And he's probably really exhausted from doing that by now, but he's like, this is what I want to keep doing. I need to work in my home church. And so we can go build a church down the road for that community down there in that neighborhood and keep doing that. And that's been the inspiration of exactly what I want to do is let's keep this going. Let's not let one person go there and have to stay there to be that church, but for people to understand we're part of the big family. Let's raise up our elders and let's introduce it down the road to these people that have a hunger and have a need. We'll establish the elders there, build that church up, and let's just keep doing that.
Multiplication of churches, multiplication of leaders leaving
Right.
behind in the churches.
Right.
What particular talents, abilities, or skill set do you think that you have that will come in handy in implementing all of this?
I think a strong work ethic is definitely something that I hold. It's borderline workaholic, but I definitely have a strong work ethic. I love challenge, love challenge, and I think this is not only going to feed the challenge for the desire for challenge's sake, but it's also a desire of my own to work in the church. I love to connect with people. And really, I'm not trying to entertain something that's corporate. I want something that's that's just good for God's sake and not to climb. So I guess a go-getter internally for the church.
Okay. I think that bodes well for teamwork and team building and leadership and establishing churches, building young men up to become elders one day. Very good. See my next question here. And by the way, if anybody listening in has a question for Talon, you can type it in the chat, and if we have time, I'll ask him those questions. What does the Lord doing the Lord's work mean to you personally? I know it's quite a bit different than being an electrician or being an architect, but I think pretty much you've answered that question in a kind of a roundabout way. But um, what does it personally mean to you?
Uh, Personally, it means selflessness, servanthood. Um, it's it, it's not self-seeking. It's not. Um, Trying to think of the best words to answer this, but it's less of me and more about everybody else. In fact, it's almost none about me, but all about uh, everybody else. It's like what you were saying earlier when you asked me, what do you tell people when you tell them the work that you want to get involved in, and you said, how can I be your servant? This is what this has done for me. How can I serve you? And let me connect the dots for you. That's what it means to me. Is what can I do to encourage you to go to Him? What can I do so that you'll see that I am your servant, for His sake, because I serve somebody greater than you. It's 100% selfless.
Yeah. There's a little sense in which even that can be somewhat selfish because you feel good that you're able to contribute to the well-being of other people.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's right. Serving God, serving other people. Who's your favorite character in the Bible?
It's so cliche, but David. I mean, I feel like when you ask people and they were like, "What's the most cliche characters that I can pick to be my favorite?" Jesus, and then David. But David is certainly my favorite character in the Bible, and it's really because you see how human and how flawed he was, but still had a desire to serve the Lord and be right with God. But I mean, it seems like the more that you read about King David, you see, man, this guy, he chooses to sin. He chooses, and no, you see that he's many a time unrighteous before God, but continues to get called back to God. You see this in his life, and you see that he also wants redemption from the Lord. And I find him very relatable. Uh, so I think that's why he's my favorite, is because you see just how human this human is, and he's relatable.
Yeah, he definitely has feet of clay and he makes some whopper mistakes, but he nonetheless has a heart for God and is constantly turning to God. And you combine the record in Second Samuel, for example, with some of those Psalms, and or First Samuel into the book with some of the Psalms. Just amazing to peek into his heart. How about your favorite section of the Bible?
Is actually not with King David.
Okay.
It's actually the shipwreck of Paul. And
Shipwreck of Paul is your favorite section.
It is. And here's why. It's because Paul's been a servant. When he becomes Paul, he's a servant. And you see that he's not absent from trouble. He's in as much as he wants to serve people and serve God and be right, still gets shipwrecked, still gets drug into the problems with the people that are around him, and still is faithful to the end. And that is the story of life of a Christian right there. And that's why it's my favorite section. It's like you can't avoid the people around you and getting pulled into the problems of people around you when you oppose them, when you oppose the situation, you still get sucked into it and you still get shipwrecked and you're still a servant at the end. You're like, God is still the Lord, and we got to serve him till the very end, even though I'm on a floating piece of wood in the middle of the freezing ocean, and it's not my fault that I'm here. And that is why it's my favorite section. It is the story of life.
That's really interesting because life is a whole lot more like a shipwreck than it is some utopia that we build where we insulate ourselves from all those shipwrecks.
Right.
And so that's a good analogy. People want to hide from the shipwrecks, but they're there.
Right.
And so Very, very interesting. We got a question. Did you ever think about being bivocational like Paul, doing tent making on the side? Because he was of the same trade, he stayed with Aquila and Priscilla, for example, Acts 18. And then he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. Have you ever thought about, doing wearing two hats?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought. I'm even still open to the possibility. If that's what needs to happen, I'm more than okay with doing that. I'd be happy to do that actually. And I was having this conversation with two of my really good friends in Arizona, Zach and Elliot, and it was probably about a year of being into college, where I was working at Target, also going to school and knowing what I wanted to do. And to them, I was talking about. I was like, I would still be okay with doing a part-time job to go out, and not even just to support for financial needs, but just to connect with people, because I was seeing that the more I would tell people this is what I want to do in retail, the more people were open to talking about and discussing it and even opposing it, but within reason. And I so even then I was even convinced like maybe I should always be bivocational, just to be able to network people, just to get out the message out there. So absolutely, I've considered being bivocational. I would still
Yeah,
be okay with being
the one thing
bivocational.
about being a full-time preacher, I mean, it has its advantages, but it has its disadvantages. And one of the huge disadvantages, if a preacher is not able to network on the and the piggyback or the coattails of fellow Christians,
Mhm.
then there's a huge opportunity that might be lost. And
Mhm.
so there are definite advantages. And I tell young preachers that if you're going to do this full time, you almost have to build teams of fellow Christians and use their input for building ministry opportunities. And you also ought to do some hobbies on the side just to be able to create friendships with non-Christians.
Mhm.
But definitely there's something to be said for at least considering doing something on the side, earning a little extra money, being able to do some networking, as you say. There are a lot of people your age. I think particularly now, we're in 2020 and we're at kind of an inflection point as a country, and there's this increased secularization. People have turned away from God, and you've got a lot of young people who are making strident moves toward atheism and agnosticism. And so they're not sure about God. They're not sure about organized religion. And here you are, same age bracket. What would you tell some of your own contemporaries about this?
Um, Usually, what I start with is what what does atheism do for you? What has it done for you? And what has Gnosticism done that's satisfying to you? And how does that make you different from everybody else? The consistency that I've seen among secular friends is that they all want to they all want to be justified somehow in standing out somehow. But when you explore that thought with them, you find that they're actually just conforming to each other. They're conforming to the rest of the world that's around them. And so, as a Christian, it's like really, I guess you would almost see us as the rebellious side because we're different from you. Our job is not to justify something that's self-seeking. Our job is to be conformed to an authority. Our job is to say, what do I need to change about my life to be a better servant that I can do for somebody else, not self-seeking. I mean, selfishness needs no religion. Uh, Self-seeking does not need a God or any justification or any religion in general. Um, but servanthood, conforming, knowing that we have somebody greater to answer to, which is a scary thought for a lot of people. That level of authority is often offensive, but it shows how we're changed in our lives and how we actually stand out, how we're actually different. So I think opening the eyes to seeing like who's actually different here is the conversation that I usually try to have.
Have you noticed that a lot of these people have an emptiness? They have a deep-seated need, and they're not able to identify it, and they're looking for answers in all the wrong places.
Yes, and that's kind of what I find, like even in the electrical trade that I was talking about earlier before, some people realize there's an emptiness about this, and somehow working really hard is not satisfying the desire that I have. And I see it all the time. People are just so disgruntled because they don't have a sense of purpose. And when you want to start exploring that conversation, you're like, well, you see the difference between you and I. You realize like how happy that I am because this job right here is not the end of my means. Like my romantic relationship is not the beginning and the end of my life. Like I have something greater than that. And people either recognize or they don't recognize that they are starving for a purpose. They're starving for something fulfilling and cannot find it and either realize, okay, there's maybe a direction here with God and religion, or they'll just keep seeking and being unhappy. And you see it unfold with people.
You mentioned a romantic relationship. Do you have a girlfriend back there?
I do have a girlfriend actually. We've been
Now,
dating.
what does she think about you coming out this way?
It's been a very tearful conversation that we've been having. Actually, our relationship is still very new. We've only been dating for about a month and a half here, actually. And
Oh
so,
no, she's
yeah,
probably sick about this.
yeah, it's been some hard conversations. We started dating for about, I don't know, it was probably about 2 weeks before this opportunity first came up. And I was very direct with her. I was like, this is going to be a good opportunity. That's a possibility. And at the beginning, she was very supportive. She was like, if this is a good opportunity, then you need to jump on this. You need to continue to pursue this. And I was like, great. Wow. Thank you for being so supportive. This is not how I thought this conversation was going to go. But
Is she working full time?
she is. Yeah, she's working full time. Actually, she works two jobs. She does full time. She does something banking that I always forget. And then part time, she also works in a donut shop. That's where she is right now, actually. And
Well, you need to tell her we have lots of jobs out in the Silicon Valley.
Okay, so that's been part of this conversation actually is when we're trying to think of like, okay, where do we go from here as January keeps coming up? It's been more like, well, we're going to be long distance. Obviously, until your lease is over, we're going to have to figure something else out after that.
I mean,
she works remote anyway.
Getting one member out of this. Maybe we can get
Yeah, you might be getting two.
Recruiting.
Yeah, you might be getting somebody that also works really well with donuts, and so you're getting somebody else with a better benefit. It's benefited me a lot.
It's not the healthiest, but we do have a few donut shops out here. So, last question that I have, unless someone else chimes in with one. So you're coming out here. You're going to be working with me. I've really enjoyed this, by the way. And if this is any indication of the fun that we're going to have over the next couple of years, I think it's going to be off the charts. But so you're going to do a preacher internship here in Santa Clara for maybe a couple of years. And what do you hope to get out of the program? So what do you hope to have in your repertoire that you know 2 years down the road that you won't have maybe January of 2021?
Experience from people that have done it is, I know, something that I'm definitely going to be walking away from. Everything else that I want to learn is gonna fall under that right there. I want to learn how to lead. I want to learn what it's like to work in a church. I want to know how to establish elders, what it's like to work with elders, what it's like to work with other churches, how to connect. All of that I know is going to come from just having the experience of people like you that have been doing that and have a lot of wisdom and a lot of education to give off. So if I was going to summarize it all right there, it would be in that right there. I want to know what the real experience is going to be like from people that have done it. And I'm more than confident that I'm going to walk away with that. And also going to become somebody that's also going to teach from that perspective, just like you. I want to be somebody that's going to be pretty much in your seat right there. Let me tell you what it's like because I know what it's like. Let me prepare you for what's going to come forward.
Well, I feel very blessed to be in this position to be able to mentor younger people. I know that, I may not have a ton of years left doing this, but if I can pass on just a little bit of wisdom, then it's extremely fulfilling for me. And I think you'll enjoy doing the same thing once you sit in this chair.
I think so too.
Any final questions of anyone that's listening in? Any final questions for Talon? If not, we're going to call it quits. I've really enjoyed this, Talon. And just to tell folks that next Thursday morning, 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, the 29th of October, I'll be having a live conversation with David Posey, one of my good old friends. He preaches with the church in Folsom, California, outside of Sacramento. And the topic will be becoming more like Jesus. What does that look like? And just 2 days prior to Halloween, one of the questions I'm going to ask him is, what's the difference between really becoming more like Jesus and just dressing up in costume and like Jesus? And so, and then 2 weeks after that, which would be November, I think the 5th or the 12th, November the 12th, I'll be talking with Shane Scott, who preaches in the Tampa Bay area of Florida. And we're going to be talking about pressures to conform to the society around us and give up non-negotiable aspects of the faith in the process. How do we resist that temptation, that pressure to conform and to fit in with society around us? Shane's written some really neat stuff about that topic. And so 2 very interesting conversation pieces, one next Thursday, and then one 2 weeks Thursday after that. And so feel free to tune in. And they'll also be available, Lord willing, on Facebook and on YouTube, our church YouTube page. And so thank you, Talon. Appreciate it. Everybody, have a good weekend, or whenever you're listening to this, have a good day. We appreciate you tuning in very much.
Thank you, Mike.